morning comes from Hong Kong, where prominent Hong Kong media mogul Jimmy Lai has been arrested by the city's police under the new national security law. The 72-year-old is one of the most popular pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong. He owns the Apple Daily Express and Next magazine publications, which are known for their anti-Beijing commentary. A company spokesperson said that Lai was picked up by the police at around 7 a.m. local time, and other senior executives of his media empire were detained along with him. Hong Kong's police have announced that 7 people were arrested on charges of colluding with foreign powers. Jimmy Lai is reportedly one of them. The police has also secured a search warrant for Lai's company offices. Reports now indicate that Hong Kong police are currently searching Apple News offices for the evidence of any collusion. Allegations against Lai were triggered by his meeting with US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the Vice President Mike Pence last year. Lai was arrested earlier this year on charges of unlawful assembly. This was before the enactment of the national security law. Jimmy Lai had promised to stay in Hong Kong and fight Beijing's oppression despite having a target on his back. And in an interview ahead of the security law's enactment, Lai said that he was prepared for prison. He is easily the most high-profile individual to have been arrested under this new security law. Lai is a deeply despised figure in Beijing. He arrived in Hong Kong at the age of 12. Fleeing communist oppression, he worked his way up from sweatshops and created a vast clothing empire. The 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown turned him into a fierce government critic. The communist regime shut down his offices in mainland China, forcing him to sell his clothing empire. And soon after, he made his entry into the media industry.
Yeah.
And yesterday, it was a victory in a way, because
right.
It didn't get through Beijing.
Now, for more details on this story, we are being joined live by our correspondent Richard Kimber from Hong Kong. A very good morning to you, Richard, and thank you so much for joining us. Now, this arrest of Hong Kong's pro-democracy tycoon Jimmy Lai has sparked global outrage. We know that this is all under the ambit of the national security law imposed by China. But tell us a little bit more about the charges against him.
That's right. He's been accused by the police of colluding with foreign forces and also on suspicion of potentially defrauding the Hong Kong government over the way that he's been using his company. Now, the collusion with foreign forces, the first charge is one that's been levied against 7 other people who have been arrested today, as you mentioned, and it comes after a spate of other arrests that have taken place over recent weeks under this new national security law, identifying and targeting key pro-democracy individuals who have been speaking out in recent months against the national security law and against the Beijing government. The other charge with relation to fraud is now emerging, more details coming through even as we speak, that suggest this is actually due to a technicality with regards to how the company has listed its operations in the building that it owns. And there's a suggestion that it actually might boil down to a simple act of offering extra services beyond the media operations that the company actually offers as part of its main business. So this may be seen by some pro-democracy supporters as a classic sense of persecution against the company on a technicality rather than being a serious charge.
Right, just elaborating on that, we're also getting reports of a publication, the newsroom being searched by officials shortly after Lai's arrest, and it is believed that this publication was critical of Beijing. So can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes, many of the publications under Next Media, which is the parent company of the Apple Daily newspaper, which is very widely read in Hong Kong, and some surveys say is the second most read news source in Hong Kong. Many of them have for a long time been very critical of the government here, also of Beijing, and specifically of the national security law. But police searches more than 100 officers going into that building before 10 a.m. local time here today. And that's a sight that's really not been seen in Hong Kong before. So many police going through a newsroom. So it's sparking a lot of concern among the journalistic community here, where there's already criticism from the Foreign Correspondents Club here with regards to how long it's taking for the government immigration to actually approve visas for journalists to operate here, which is leading some concern that Hong Kong could end up being further wrapped up into this continued dislocation between the US and China when it comes to how to operate fairly and freely in the media.
Right. Now, Richard, there seems to be another crackdown on dissent and any kind of freedom of expression in Hong Kong, and people are saying that this is the end of autonomy in Hong Kong. So what are the pro-democracy activists saying?
Well, certainly social media this morning has lit up yet again for another consecutive week with anger and frustration from pro-democracy activists calling this the beginning of the police state in Hong Kong, the end of press freedom in Hong Kong, all of these messages being thrown around. There are, though, it should be said, some supporters of the government in this regard who see people like Jimmy Lai and other outspoken pro-democracy supporters as troublemakers who are really trying to upset the stability of Hong Kong and undermine this new national security law. So these people are not without their critics, but certainly the pro-democracy camp seeing this as yet another example of the government targeting people who are really just standing up for the rights of the average Hong Konger. So this again is continuing to divide Hong Kong society. There are those who really just long now for stability and economic prosperity in this city and are fed up with all of this continued unrest. But for all the pro-democracy supporters, seeing somebody as prominent as Jimmy Lai and his two sons and his executives from his company being arrested in this way is just going to add further fuel to the flames of their attempts to try and continue to show an opposition.
Right. Now, my final question, this arrest comes quick on the heels of the US sanctions imposed on Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam and other top officials as well. And yet it seems that Hong Kong and Beijing's officials are undeterred and continue to clamp down on any kind of political freedom. So has there been any response from Carrie Lam's administration?
Well, the response to the US sanctions has been very strong. It's interesting because a few weeks ago when she was asked about the potential for sanctions on her personally, she said she would laugh it off and that it really wouldn't cause her any concern whatsoever. Roll forward 3 weeks when those sanctions are actually imposed and she really has instead been parroting the line from Beijing and saying, for example, these sanctions are despicable, that they are hypocritical, and being incredibly strong with her condemnation of US actions, and that's widely been condemned both by Beijing and the Hong Kong government. The pro-democracy camp here, on the other hand, they do actually welcome this personal action against the Hong Kong leadership because they see this as the only means by which to put pressure on the government. But generally speaking, all of those actions by the US so far just being dismissed and met with a lot of outrage here in the establishment.
Right. All right, Richard, thank you so much for joining us this morning and for all your inputs on this story. Let's move on to the other big story that WION has been tracking. Health Secretary Alex Azhar met with